As we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Day, what does he have to teach us today to help us bring this nation back to righteousness? I think you're going to be surprised and challenged. This is the voice of resistance.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
As we remember the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I thought that it would be appropriate to use his words as a platform for what we might do in our generation to bring this country back to righteousness and justice, life and liberty under God. America is in a crisis. I would argue that we are in more danger now than we have ever been in our entire history. The stage is set, both naturally and supernaturally, for judgments to come about which will be the undoing of this republic if we don't change directions. I mean, think about it. The shedding of innocent blood, restoring a sexual and marital ethic that is based upon the laws of God, bringing an end to this massive spying, the communism and socialism on the half shell that have made us a virtual federal plantation. All of these things in and of themselves are hobbling us, crippling us, and could result in the death of the republic. So in that light, Dr. King's life, his actions, his words have a lot to teach us. Because frankly, his leadership was central to breaking the back of segregation and the unjust Jim Crow laws that marred the South for generations. His letter from the Birmingham jail is a magnificent treatise on the purpose of civil disobedience and the deliberate creation of social tension in order to change unjust laws. And I encourage you to take the time to read the entire letter from the Birmingham jail as soon as you possibly can. It is a masterpiece. But as a part of the two-part series that we are doing on Dr. King's life and work, I'm going to read excerpts from the letter from the Birmingham jail. So if there are laws you know must be changed, this letter provides a game plan, a proven game plan for victory. Let's begin. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Is it negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. There are a lot of people who are afraid of tension. He had it in his day. There are many good Christian men and women who deplore the evils that are plaguing this nation, but they would rather have peace and polite discussion and everyone going along and getting along than tension and crisis. And the problem is, as he said, that if we will agree to go along with the polite rules of society regarding unthinkable evils, well, the evils will remain. The status quo remains. And that's exactly what we don't want. I continue. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for non-violent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. It was kind of a cheeky, ironic thing to say at the end. He wanted negotiation, but he understood that they needed gadflies. By the way, a gadfly was a fly that would bite a horse and cause it to get worked up and be more willing to ride into action. He understood that the protesters, the sit-ins, the civil disobedience, all of these things working together were the gadflies that would provoke a discussion, a negotiation, which led to the changing of a law. So you think right now with me about the evil laws that this government is upholding with an iron fist, and then say to yourself, are any of them going to change without tension? I don't think so. We'll come back from this break. We'll continue reading from the letter from the Birmingham jail. My wife and I, for 5 years, have been grinding our own wheat and baking our own bread from scratch. Within 2 hours, you can have fresh wheat in your hand and then piping hot bread come out of the oven. The most nutritious and delicious bread you will ever have. And we do it for under $1 a loaf. Call Paula's Bread and find out about this grain mill and the mixer and how it can save you money and change your life. Only one link in the chain of destiny can be handled at a time. Sir Winston Churchill. I want you to understand that the life, the words, the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a profound impact on me as a young man. When I founded and led Operation Rescue, I looked to the writings and the life of Dr. King more than any other person because the victory of the civil rights movement over segregation showed a game plan which could be used in another political battle, such as the desire to end child killing. This letter, the letter from the Birmingham jail, had a profound impact on me nearly 30 years ago, and it's got great value today for all of us. And while we have not prevailed in our fight to end legalized child killing, the keys to victory are bound up in the principles that we see here. Dr. King, by the way, was arrested 30 times in his struggle against segregation. And so let's look at nonviolent civil disobedience. He said, "You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all." By the way, when you read this entire letter, you will be amazed at the number of biblical references and references to church history and church theologians that Dr. King makes. This is a theocentric defense, a God-centered defense of civil disobedience. And friend, as I mentioned the other day with Dr. Dobson, and whether or not the Obama administration should just close the doors of various ministries, or whether the ministries should close the doors themselves, I advocate defy him, break the law, and then let the nation see what tyranny looks like. Create the tension so that the debate can begin in earnest and the law can be changed. Let's continue. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. He's dead right. He's got it right. A just law is in line with the law of God. And for those in the ACLU and various TV shows and websites that hate God or that hate the law of God, you have to understand that Martin Luther King was a champion for just law being anchored in the eternal law of God. And let me say this to Christians. There are many of us who are afraid to publicly embrace the idea and declare the notion that Dr. King does here, that all just law must be rooted in the eternal laws of God. We're embarrassed. We don't want to be politically incorrect. Well, friend, listen to me. If you don't anchor law, man-made law, in the eternal law of God, and if you don't allow the eternal law of God to define good and evil, you're in a moral free fall. We literally lose the ability to define good and evil in unchanging absolute terms, because if you throw the law of God under the bus or turn your back to it, what are you left with? A Supreme Court decision? The barrel of a gun? The vote of the public? The latest public opinion poll? What some movie star or rock and roll star says should be the normal ethic of the day? If we turn our back on the law of God being the foundation for civil law and just law, or being the ruler by which we determine an unjust law, at that point, it's every man doing what is right in his own eyes. We are in a moral free fall. I'm going to follow the advice of Dr. King, St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and use the law of God as the foundation for all just law and the warning sign for that which is unjust. That's an agenda for victory. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books, theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. Thomas Jefferson said, "All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent." If we are going to restore this republic, it would behoove us to study the life and the works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And some people say, well, he wasn't a good man. We're going to talk about that on tomorrow's program. We're going to run right at it. But today, we're looking at how the principles of the letter from the Birmingham jail can help us in our struggle against the evils that are plaguing us today, including the need for peaceful civil disobedience. I continue with the letter. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. I think that we often forget that the Boston Tea Party wasn't just a peaceful civil disobedience demonstration. They destroyed over $1 million worth of private property. Let's continue. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that, had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. All of what he is saying is true. What laws are in existence in America today that we should be openly defying and disobeying so that we can upend them and bring an end to them? In Dr. King's day, he had great difficulty with the moderates, just like we're plagued with them today. Let's read. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with you in your methods of direct action. We today are plagued by people who are armchair quarterbacks. They want to sit in the chair and do nothing. I mean, they'll pontificate, they'll talk, they'll say abortion is murder and marriage should only be between a man and a woman, but they won't get out of their chair, go into the public square in any arena to create tension. They'll speak bold words in the safety of their four church walls or in the Christian ghetto that they have built for themselves, but they won't confront the powers that be with the truth and create tension. Let's continue. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open, where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. Friend, if we are going to cure the ills that plague this nation, we are going to have to use words and have deeds, actions that create tension and bring it up to the surface so that justice prevails in the conflict. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, You're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. For behold, God is my helper, and the Lord is the protector of my soul. Turn back the evils upon my enemies, and cut them off in thy truth. In Dr. King's day, he cherished hopes that the Church of Jesus Christ would rise up against the evil of segregation and the Jim Crow laws. Unfortunately, he was disappointed. And today, many of us are justly disappointed in what the church has failed to do. Here's what he said. There was a time when the church was very powerful. In the time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the people in power became disturbed and immediately sought to convict the Christians for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven, called to obey God rather than man. Small in number, they were big in commitment. They were too God-intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. By their effort and example, they brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiatorial contests. Things are different now. So often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is the arch defender of the status quo. Doesn't that sound like today? The arch defender of the status quo? Inasmuch as what things are said or even not said from the pulpits, and what things are done or not done by our Christian leaders, has the church become the defender of the status quo. I continue. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are at present misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. He had the gut instinct that even if the church failed, God would still have a remnant that stood, and that justice would prevail in their struggle because it was the will of God. I close with 2 thoughts. Number 1, there are things that are the will of God. And sometimes they don't happen. God doesn't want babies being killed by the millions, but it still happens. Why? Because of the things that we have failed to do. The fault doesn't rest with God. The fault rests with us. And number 2, judgment begins at the house of God. Thus said the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 4. If the church refuses to rise in this hour to defend life and liberty and pretends, oh, these aren't gospel issues, we as a nation will not survive. But the judgment of our God will begin in the house of God. God have mercy on us and wake us up.